Most people assume that strategic partnerships fail because of technology problems, financial problems, maybe legal disputes. In my experience, that's often not the case. More often, partnerships fail because the parties involved have different objectives or different expectations, even, and this is amazing when you think about it, different definitions of success. Over the course of my career, I've helped structure many partnerships involving technology companies, universities, manufacturers, distributors, and even government organizations. Some have created substantial value. Others, unfortunately, have failed. One of the most important lessons I learned came from a partnership I helped create in China more than 40 years ago. At the time, it looked almost perfect on paper. It wasn't. Let me tell you what happened. Technology doesn't often fail, but partnerships can and sometimes do fail. Or at least that's what I've learned from one of the first strategic partnerships I ever helped create. Over the course of my career, I've helped structure strategic partnerships involving, and let's go through the list here, technology companies, universities, manufacturers, distributors, and government organizations. And some of those partnerships have created substantial value, but others, unfortunately, and this is life, have failed, right? So one of the most important lessons I learned came from a partnership that honestly looked almost perfect on paper. The partnership involved my company, it was called Sinotech, based in Dallas, Texas, and Tsinghua University in Beijing, China. The year was 1980. Now, today, Tsinghua is recognized as one of the world's leading universities. In 1980, however, China was only just beginning to emerge from the aftermath of the Cultural Revolution. Universities were rebuilding, research programs are being restarted, advanced computing resources were scarce. And so we and our company, we saw an opportunity. Here's what we did. We proposed establishing a data entry service bureau operation in Beijing. Our vision was that Tsinghua students would perform data entry services for Western clients that we would bring to the table, providing Sinotech access to this highly educated but low-cost labor force. In return, Tsinghua would receive access to a state-of-the-art computer system that would be available for use by its research departments during the off hours. It was a win-win. The economics were compelling. We would gain access to low-cost labor. Tsinghua would gain access to computing resources that were simply unavailable elsewhere in China in 1980. Everybody appeared to win. Now, to make this project possible, I reached out to the CEO of Nixdorf Computers, then one of the leading manufacturers of data entry computer systems, and asked him, would you be willing to sell and support a system in Beijing? He said, we are not doing any business in the mainland of China, but we will for this opportunity. So in September of 1980, after doing all this preliminary work, I traveled to Beijing to negotiate a definitive agreement with Tsinghua University and also, on one evening, negotiate with a senior representative of the Chinese Communist Party. After a week, the agreement was successfully negotiated and concluded. And on Friday, we had a signing party. It was marvelous. But during the meetings during the week, I saw some warning signs that at the time, honestly, I didn't fully appreciate. During those meetings, and we were meeting in a large conference area within Tsinghua, there were a number of professors that openly objected to the partnership. And their objections, they weren't economic. They were ideological. They viewed the arrangement as a capitalist enterprise profiting from student labor. And they were uncomfortable with the idea that a Western company would earn money from work performed by these Chinese students. And I can remember them looking at me, and they were very, very unhappy. These professors, they said, you're a capitalist. And, where I came from, that was a compliment. But in this context, at that time in history, that was a problem, right? Now, I remember thinking that those concerns really wouldn't matter. After all, the university leadership supported the project. The sponsoring Communist Party officials supported the project. The economics were sound. So the deal moved forward, right? But over time, those concerns resurfaced. And what I eventually learned was that strategic partnerships don't succeed simply because the parties signing the agreement support the relationship. They succeed when the broader stakeholder community supports the relationship. And they fail when influential stakeholders remain opposed to its underlying purpose, as these professors remained opposed to this particular transaction and agreement. Looking back, the economics of the partnership were really never the problem. The problem wasn't the technology, wasn't the contract that we negotiated. The problem was stakeholder alignment. The individuals responsible for making the partnership work day to day, they never fully embraced the underlying premise of the relationship. Now, that lesson has stayed with me. So in subsequent partnerships, I have paid much closer attention to all the participants involved in the transaction, not just the executives negotiating the agreement. I mean, I ask myself, when facilitating a strategic partnership, who really benefits and who's threatened? Maybe who's gaining influence or who's losing influence? Who may oppose the transaction even when the economics make perfect sense? There are so many different motives at play when you're doing a strategic relationship because there's so many different stakeholders who have different interests, preferences, outcomes, or as some people say, equities. All of those things are competing, right? And you have to pay attention to all of that when you're structuring these deals. Those questions often determine whether, honestly, a partnership succeeds or fails. So today, when I review strategic partnerships as a consultant or evaluate business relationships and litigation, I often see the same issue, right? The documents may be sound, the economics may be sound, even the strategy may be sound. But if the interest and the incentives of key stakeholders aren't aligned, the partnership can still fail. And sometimes understanding why that happened becomes one of the central questions in a dispute. That was a lesson I learned in Beijing in 1980, and it's remained relevant ever since. If any of this resonates with you, let's talk.